Good morning, everybody. I see you starting to filter in. Give us a few seconds here to let the group get in. All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Centralina Area Agency on Aging July webinar. Today's topic is going to be best practices for serving LGBT older adults. We're excited to have you. First, we're going to go over just a couple of Zoom webinar features. So everybody, we are in webinar mode, so you're automatically muted. You can't see the other participants, but you can see the speakers and the hosts. If you have any questions, you can do so in the chat box or in the Q&A box, whatever you're comfortable doing. Today's session is being recorded, and we'll send that out to you guys, and it'll also be posted on our Centralina website. All right, today we've got two great speakers. We've got Katie Kutcher. Katie Kutcher is one of the, is the Assistant Aging Programs Director here at Centralina Area Agency on Aging. She's been working in the aging services field for more than 16 years, has a master's degree in gerontology. She's been with Centralina since 2010 and works with home and community-based services and supports and provides community education about aging and disability awareness and cultural competency. Katie is also a part-time instructor at UNC Charlotte for the gerontology program. And then secondly, we have Austin Caton. Austin Caton has been working in the aging and mental health field for 18 years. He's been with Centralina for about a year and a half and was with Curtar Area Agency on Aging before that. He works with the Family Caregiver Program, helping support caregivers in our 9-county Centralina region. He has a Master of Science degree in abnormal psychology and is currently getting a second master's degree in gerontology and has been married to his husband, Rick, for 3 years. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful speakers.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Caitlin, for the introductions. We are very excited to be here to share best practices for serving LGBT older adults. So as was mentioned, I'm Katie Kutcher. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm one of the assistant aging directors at the Centralina Area Agency on Aging. So we do a variety of education and advocacy efforts at the Area Agency on Aging. And I just wanted to talk about some of our recent efforts in LGBT cultural competency education. So we're really excited to have just wrapped up a 3.5-year grant through civil money penalty grant funding that supported the Area Agency on Aging conducting cultural competency training to skilled nursing homes across the state of North Carolina to help them in serving and creating inclusive communities for LGBT residents. And so what we learned a lot through the process, is that so many of those best practices apply across the continuum of care. So we're really excited to be able to share that with you. I also wanted to mention, as part of our commitment to continuing to learn, we have been in partnership with SAGE, which is a national organization. So that's Services and Advocacy for Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender Elders. It's a national organization, and they have a cultural competency training certification program. And we're pleased to say that the Centralina Area Agency on Aging, we have that platinum certification, which means all of our staff have gone through training now for 4 years, going on 5 years. And we're going to talk more about that training opportunity a little later, but let's jump in, let's get started. And we're going to kick things off to find out a little bit about who is in the Zoom room. So hopefully a question just popped up on your screen and it should let you choose more than one answer. So maybe more than one of these apply to you. So take a few moments here and give us some information about who is in the room. Now note, if you see that you're checking that other box, we would ask you to hop on over to the chat box and you could give us some information about who you are in the chat box as well. So take your time. We'll let you respond to that. That'll help give us some information of who all's here with us today. And I'm looking in the chat box. Awesome. We've got some social workers, ombudsman, representatives from the Area Agency on Aging. Wonderful. Case managers. Oh, I see. Hello, Elisa. I see some familiar names out there. And then thank you, Caitlin has put it on the screen here. So you can see we've got a combination of older adults, caregivers, aging service providers, and other. And so we can all keep our eye on the chat box to see who's here. So a wealth of experience, a wealth of knowledge in the Zoom room today. Thank you all for joining us. So I think we have another question that we want to ask, again, just to get a feel for experience in the room today. And so this question is asking, do you have experience working with LGBT older adults? And so the options are yes, no, or I'm not sure. So take your time and get those in as well. And we'll keep things moving. This is fun. I'm glad the polling is working. I'm new to the polling, but nice to get in some interaction here. All right, and so we have a mix here. So yes, about half are sure that you've worked with LGBT older adults. Some are saying no, not yet, and some are saying, you know what, I'm not sure. And so wonderful. So we're going to be sharing again best practices for working with LGBT older adults, whether you're an aging service provider or whether you want to better support your friends, your neighbors, your community members. There's information here for everyone. So we're glad you're here with us. So we're going to take a look at what the purpose of the workshop is and what it's not. So this workshop, it's not designed to change personal or religious beliefs about sexual orientation or gender identity, but it is designed to inform, educate, and confirm maybe what you're already doing well to create an inclusive community, and then identify potential opportunities of how we can make our community more inclusive for everyone. So let's look at some objectives. So we want to increase understanding of diversity among older adults, their families, and caregivers. We want to better understand sexual orientation and gender identity. We really want to increase awareness of environments that are characteristic of inclusion, respect, and dignity, and practice inclusive communication skills. And what's really important to us is we want you to leave with an action plan, some potential next steps, things that you could do to, again, create a more inclusive environment for everyone. All right. Austin, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thanks, Katie. All right. So while the U.S. and the census has never measured LGBT people living in America, the report estimates that there are currently around 3 million LGBT adults over the age of 50. Y'all, that's a lot. That's a lot within the United States. And so it's important to create those safe spaces for LGBT older adults. The number is expected to grow to be around 7 million. That's a lot of people, everybody. 7 million people by 2030. Next slide. All right, so we're going to take a second here and watch this trailer. And what it is just called Gen Silent. Gen Silent is the trailer, the movie is kind of focused on individuals, LGBT individuals in long-term care facilities, but really, truly, it's across the board. A lot of the same issues that this population faces. So go ahead and let's start the trailer.
A lot of people believe that you just live happily ever after, and that just is a myth.
People like ourselves, older, are hiding in nursing homes or whatever because they are scared to death.
It's incredibly common to go back into the closet again.
You just know when they don't want you there.
We've heard about homemakers going in, taking out a Bible and having the elder pray and asking for forgiveness.
And to be cured. It's not too late for you to be cured of this. They go back in the closet. She might mistreat me or abuse me.
They're so afraid of it, they are resisting any kind of medical attention.
That person was in their mid-20s during the McCarthy era.
the closet was the norm.
They could lose their job, they could lose, families.
We were sick.
Just
we were
sick
We were
people.
considered sick.
People were involuntarily hospitalized in psychiatric facilities.
Even electroshock.
The degradation of these people is so complete that their sex satisfaction come only in being tortured themselves.
I was on the route to the nut farm.
So there's a real distrust of mainstream institutions.
I would never put myself in danger.
He became much more fearful of people knowing that he was gay.
You're not leaving now, are you?
Not right now.
LGBT elders are more likely than the general population to age alone because many gay elders never had children, have not had great relationships with their families of origin. There would be a higher degree of sort of alienation and isolation.
My family was the reason I existed, and I lost them all. If they ever choose to catch up before I die, I welcome them.
LGBT aging issues are an epidemic.
There's a small and growing group of us.
We're trying to go into the existing network so they become more inclusive. One of the most common lines we get is like, we don't have any gay elders here.
If I wasn't the only person responsible for Alexander, I would have ended my life.
This is our life.
Good to see ya! Hi! I'll be there in a few years.
I built a stairway to paradise with a new step every day. We have a whole generation of people who don't know who we are. That's really sad, because you're missing out on a lot. We know a lot. We did a lot for you. You wouldn't be here if it weren't for us.
Look at how scrawny they are. Too bad I don't have an open casket.
Well, there'll be no open casket. There won't be anything, right?
If we are saying come out and be filled with pride, it's our responsibility to make sure that continues right through their last day.
All right. So let's just say that trailer is definitely gut-wrenching to watch. And my favorite part of it is her line of, "You just don't know, what we did for the movement. You wouldn't be here because without us." And so I think that was a pretty powerful statement, because we're going to circle back around to the history. We'll talk about that in the next few slides, but let's open this up to some discussion here. What were your thoughts, your reactions? Throw it in the chat box. Take yourself off mute. Tell us what you think. That they are more alone. Okay, let me open the chat box here. That would help. Heartbreaking. Yes, Jessica, absolutely heartbreaking. It's so hard, especially as a panelist on here. It gets you right here in your heart, and you have to keep your composure. Very sad they're being treated that way. Yes, absolutely. As someone in the LGBT community, it pains me to see my elders have to force themselves back into the closet. Yes. Never thought about broken family relationships. Yeah. That's very common in the LGBT community. I speak from personal experience. It's very common. Oh, interesting. Haley says she did her master's thesis on housing discrimination for LGBT and older adults. Interesting. Yes, Carrie, it is a really heavy topic that no one really wants to discuss. Absolutely. You guys are just throwing some great stuff in here. The poignant film sheds light on issues not discussed. Yes, powerful message. Absolutely. Oh, I like this one from Peggy. Never thought about older gays not having children and not having family good relationships. That's what this whole presentation is about, to get us thinking about these issues as we deal with them, because we're there, y'all. You may not see us, but we're there. Discouraged that they have to hide themselves. Yes, very sad. And I promise I can't get to all of these because you guys are just throwing them up there. Thank you so much for interacting with us today. All right, so we're going to kind of move on. Thank you. You can keep throwing your comments in the comment section, and we'll try to get to some of them and read them. All right, so we're going to circle back now to some of the history. I'm not going to read through all of these because everybody can read, but I'm going to kind of throw some of them up here and kind of discuss it. Ones that really stuck out to me. Excuse me, goodness. So you've got, starting in the 1920s, U.S. Navy soldiers use sailors to identify and sometimes seduce gay men in order to report them to authorities. You've got the 1930s at the beginning of that electroshock treatment. They also did, it's not on here, but they did lobotomies. That was a big thing with lobotomies, which oftentimes left brain damage. 1940s, we've got the World War II happening. It's revealed that 10,000 to 15,000 LGBT people were killed in Nazi concentration camps. Fun fact, if you've never been to the beautiful Washington, D.C. Museum there, the Holocaust Museum, they have a section dedicated to LGBT during the Nazi concentration camps and kind of their experience of what they went through. I used to be a teacher, and I used to take my kids there every single year, 8th grade. They did a whole section on that, and it's called The Pink Triangle. And it's also a book. If anybody's interested, it's a wonderful book. Just Google Pink Triangle. There's some great information about the experiences that LGBT individuals went through during the Nazi concentration camps. You got 1940s, U.S. military bars gays and lesbians from serving. And then you're going to see, and kind of the history, it circles back to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We'll get to that. President Eisenhower calls for the dismissal of LGBT individuals from government service. And then in the 60s, when we had that sexual revolution beginning happening and all of that, New York allows police to arrest those wearing less than 3 articles of gender-appropriate clothing, holding hands, kissing, or dancing with someone of the same sex. Next slide. Thank you. So interesting, 1970s, 80% of surveyed Oregon doctors reported that they refuse to treat a known homosexual. And continuing kind of into the 1970s with the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, homosexuality was listed as a mental health diagnosis during that time. You got the U.S. Supreme Court. 70s was a big year. You got the U.S. Supreme Court refuses to hear cases of a teacher fired for lesbianism, making it legal to fire teachers for being LGBT. It's pretty sad because we need teachers. 1990s, Congress passes the Defense of Marriage Act. Gotta love that one, forbidding federal recognition of state-approved same-sex marriages. And then you've got that Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy during the Clinton era. And then in the 1990s, Matthew Shepard, if you're not familiar with him, go back and Google Ellen DeGeneres and Matthew Shepard. She does this beautiful speech on it about Matthew Shepard, who was a young gay man in Wyoming. There's a documentary called Angels Among Us. It's gut-wrenching, but it's a beautiful documentary. It's about Matthew Shepard's life. Poor man was tied to a fence post and beaten and left there for dead for 3 days, I believe it was. So it's pretty powerful to watch. Next slide. All right, so this is just kind of a infographic on some of the major milestones of LGBT history. So we're going to go all the way back to 1948 with the Kinsey Report. Homosexuality is more prevalent than thought. It's pretty interesting. 1961, Illinois is the first state to decriminalize homosexuality. We've got the Stonewall riots. Everybody knows about the Stonewall riots that happened in the 60s. And then 1970s, you've got the first gay pride parade in Chicago, New York, and LA. 1973, homosexuality was removed from the DSM, that Diagnostic Statistical Manual. You've got the creation of PFLAG, incorporating a national parents, friends of lesbian and gays. I always get that wrong, but I got that right that time. 1980s, you've got the first reported cases of AIDS. And AIDS used to be called GRID, G-R-I-D. You can look that up. And it was a gay-related immune deficiency syndrome. It was GRID. And then they started calling it AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And then you've got the 2004, Massachusetts became the very first state to legalize same-sex marriage. They called it domestic union. They didn't call it marriage, they called it a union. And then over 1 million LGBT marches on Washington, D.C. I was actually there for that one. I marched in Washington, D.C., and it was an amazing experience. Obama, during the Obama era, he presented there. There was Cynthia Nixon from Sex and the City. She was there, which was fun because I'm a huge Sex and the City fan. What gay man isn't? And so it was pretty amazing. People were sitting on top of the buildings, waving the flags. But we all marched towards the state's capital. So it's pretty amazing experience. Next slide. All right, so this is just another infographic. It's a little bit more colorful, I think. So you've got Christine and I can't pronounce that last name, Jorgensen. Did I say that right, Katie? Thumbs up. First sex assignment, reassignment surgery. Then you've got in the 1924, kind of going back before that, the first gay rights organization, Society for Human Rights, which actually I believe evolved into HRC. I want to say it did. And then the Human Rights Campaign. And then you've got the Stonewall riots. You've got the first National March for Lesbian and Gay Rights. Then the marriage equality by the Supreme Court. I remember that day. That was a big one. And then you've got in 2017, kind of wrapping it up, you've got the addition of the black and brown to the rainbow flag to kind of incorporate all of it. All right. So now we're going to focus and shift from the history to kind of the health and well-being of LGBT individuals. So many LGBT individuals will face many challenges, putting them at risk for social isolation and decreased quality of life. We all know that older persons deal with that social isolation, and that's a big issue, especially due to COVID. That kind of came to light. But LGBT people face a particular issue, a higher rate of social isolation. They've got higher rates of poor mental health, depression, anxiety. Oftentimes they're left untreated because they're afraid to go and ask for help. You've got higher rates of health risk behaviors that can involve sexual behaviors, drug use. Because of that mental health, it's all connected together. And their support network tends to be the same age and may not be able to provide long-term support. So you have to think about that. You've got your friends, you've gone through the AIDS crisis in the 80s and 90s. Many of them died off. And then you've got issues where you're all aging together. You didn't have children. So who's going to care for you? And so oftentimes they feel very alone and isolated. Next slide. So just some common experiences. We've kind of connected some of this before and some of the previous slides, but they're more likely to be disconnected from their families. And you're going to hear that family of choice. And Katie's going to go a little bit more into that in the next few slides, but that family of choice, you're choosing who your family is. And this is a big one. I mean, as I said, with individuals that kind of came through the 80s and 90s, like I did, through the AIDS epidemic, and even beyond that, a lot of their families are not accepting, so they're having to create their own family structure. They have a greater tendency to age alone. They're 3 to 4 times less likely to have children. We're seeing that more and more now with adoption, surrogacy, all of that, but still statistically, they're 3 to 4 times less likely to have children. That family of choice is typically the same age, as we've kind of said. And they're more likely to have financial concerns, so discrimination in employment, income disparities, tax laws, and even marriage laws. Next slide. So LGBT individuals, elders may have experienced discrimination. So there's just some common themes that we kind of see through the data. There lack visibility within the community. As I said in that trailer, They tend to go back into the closet if they're going into long-term care. They are dependent on social service organizations. They're not accepted by service providers or their peers, or they have caregivers who are uncomfortable caring for them. And that's a very common one. I've heard that even before I've seen the trailer of, bringing a Bible and having them pray over, to run from their sins or something like that, instead of providing care for them. And that causes issues in mental health. And going back into the closet due to fear of abuse. Elder abuse is a big one. So we're going to go into the theories of intersectionality, and Katie's kind of discuss that more. But just as a general definition, intersectionality refers to the intersection of identities that shapes an individual's experiences through society and over time. You have to think of it, I always say it's more like a lens. You got a lens. So all your experiences are like a kaleidoscope, and you're looking through that lens, and that's how you view the world. So an individual's identity consists of multiple intersecting factors, including gender, race, ethnicity, class, sexuality. In fact, some prefer to use plural words like identities. Again, that kaleidoscope and that lens that you're looking through. To emphasize the identity is fluid and it shifts through time as an individual ages. Next slide. All right, Katie's going to take it over from here.
Thank you, Austin. All right, so we're going to go into discussing some LGBT affirming language. And so I'll just throw out a basic question. Do y'all think language is important? Are the words we use important? You can take it to the chat box. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Absolutely. I'm seeing lots of feedback in the chat box. It is. Of course, we know it is. It's very important. And so we're just taking some time to familiarize individuals with LGBT affirming language. And so what we recognize in this space, of course, it's a safe space to ask questions. The whole purpose of this webinar is to learn. So we wanted to open up the chat box again to ask you to take a look at these terms here. And if you have questions, if there's terminology that you're not familiar with, you can put it in the chat box, let us know, and we'll review that terminology together. And then we're going to go into some more detail in the next few slides. So I'll give you a moment to take a look here. Any terms stand out to you that you'd like to learn more about? All right, cisgender. So thank you. And so I'll keep my eye on the chat box. And this tends to be one that people may not be familiar with. So cisgender is really recognizing when someone, their gender identity, it aligns with their sex assigned at birth. So I'll back that up a little bit. So think about, the day a baby's born and the doctor says it's a girl or it's a boy. Cisgender is recognizing that when that individual is growing up, their gender identity aligns with the sex assigned at birth. So if when I was born, the doctor said it's a girl, I identify as female, then I'm cisgender. So hopefully that helps. So that's explaining cisgender. Let's look in the chat box. Anything else? Gender expression. Okay, so we are going to talk about gender expression. We're going to talk about sexual orientation and gender identity a little more in the upcoming slides. So let's go ahead and we'll keep moving then. And again, you can put any questions in the chat box. So what this slide is really trying to help individuals understand is that these different terms are really different concepts. So the LGBT community, it's an umbrella term, right? It captures a lot of different factors, but we really want to take a look at each of these individually. So starting with sex, thinking of that sex assigned at birth or between the legs, right? Again, when a baby's born, the doctor says it's a boy or it's a girl, that would be the sex assigned at birth. Moving over to the left here, and then recognizing that gender identity is one's internal understanding of themselves. So their internal understanding of their gender, thinking of between the ears, our internal understanding of ourselves. And so that would be gender identity. And so what we're recognizing is someone's gender identity, it may align with the sex assigned at birth, which would be cisgender, but in some cases it does not align. And in those cases, those individuals would be transgender, meaning that their gender identity does not align with the sex assigned at birth. Moving down to gender expression, thinking of our outward expressions of our gender. And that's really based on social norms and perceptions. So you could think of clothing, hair, makeup, and so on. That would be how someone's expressing their gender to the outward world. And recognizing here again that someone's gender expression may or may not align with their true gender identity, depending on how they're expressing themselves. Okay, and thank you. I saw, yes, the PowerPoint will be shared. And so those are all kind of relating to gender, gender identity, and sex. And then as we move over here to sexual orientation, that's a totally different concept because it's really related to the attraction or affection for others. And so when we think of sexual orientations, of course, there's a number of them, but thinking of gay, lesbian, bisexual, straight, those are all examples of sexual orientations. So hopefully that helps, again, kind of differentiate between these terms. So let's move on to the next slide. So let's talk some about the trans umbrella. So sometimes people may have questions or would like some more familiarity with these terms as well. So again, transgender would be someone who does not identify with their sex assigned at birth. So that gender identity does not align with sex assigned at birth. Trans feminine would be someone who identifies more female than male. Trans masculine, someone who identifies as more male than female. And then as we move down here, a trans man would be someone who was female at birth, but identifies as male. A trans woman, someone who was male at birth, but identifies as female. And so again, the important thing, we want to recognize someone and we, in that person-centered model, right, we want to be sure that we are treating them how they want to be treated, providing that dignity and respect. So again, how do they identify? If they identify as a female, then we want to recognize that. All right. So then also under the trans umbrella would be multigender. So someone who identifies with more than one gender, sometimes referred to as bigender. Also the concept of gender fluid. So someone whose gender changes. So again, really recognizing that there's this continuum. So it's not binary, not just male or female. The trans umbrella, again, is really reminding us that there's this continuum. And then this term is really important, dead naming. So dead naming occurs when someone, whether it's intentional or not, refers to a person who's transgender by the name they used before they transitioned. So it may be their birth name or their given name, but it's not the name that they choose to go by today. And that's considered dead naming. And so just recognizing again, and maybe it's unintentional when you're corrected, or if it happens, you can apologize, note what somebody wants to be called and move forward. And again, that really goes back to good person-centered care. We know it's always been a best practice to ask people what they want to be called. And so of course that still holds true. Let's go to the next slide. And so this is just kind of noteworthy that these are some terms that are generally no longer used. You could think of them as retired terms. So just note that these terms are not really viewed as affirming. And so you may want to retire those if those are terms that you had been using. All right. So what about pronouns? So of course, as we mentioned earlier, it's always worth asking, right? Asking someone what pronouns they prefer. Just like we were sharing our pronouns as we were being introduced, we've added them here in our Zoom chat box here or in our name tent. So of course you can share your own pronouns, but certainly you can ask others. And so recognizing that some pronouns are gendered, like female pronouns would be she, her, and hers, male, he, him, and his, but there's also gender neutral pronouns. So maybe less commonly used ze, here, and hers, but more commonly used they and theirs. So again, the most important takeaway is just asking people what they want to be called. And we'll talk more about that when we go into best practices. Okay, ooh, fun. We've got some more polling questions. So Caitlin, if you could bring up, I think starting with question 3, we've got a series of 3 questions here. So the question is, what is the definition of transgender? So take a look and weigh your options. Is it the sex, male or female, given to a child at birth? Is it a term describing a person whose gender identity aligns with their sex assigned at birth? Is it a person who is attracted to another person of the same sex? Or is it an umbrella term for people whose gender identity and or expression is different from cultural expectations based on the sex they were assigned at birth? So take some time, think about it, put in your answers here. And we can see the results here momentarily. Didn't know there was going to be any pop quizzes, right? But just a chance to check in. Let's see. Awesome. Yes, it is that umbrella term. Again, so thinking of transgender when someone's gender identity does not align with that sex assigned at birth. Awesome. Thank you. So we've got another one. So here comes another question. Which of the below are examples of sexual orientations? So we have gay, lesbian, bisexual, straight, or all of the above. And sorry, I see some notes in the chat box. Sorry for anyone having technical difficulty, but hopefully it'll work this round. So if you go ahead and place your answers there. And yes, woohoo, all of the above. So yes, those are all examples of sexual orientations. Thank you. And I think we have one more polling question in this section. Okay, so the question is, what is the definition of cisgender? So what is the definition of cisgender? When someone does not identify exclusively as a man or a woman, when a person's gender identity is different than the sex they were assigned at birth, when a person's gender identity aligns with their sex assigned at birth, or the lack of a sexual attraction or desire for other people. So take a moment there. All right, so yes, cisgender is when a person's gender identity aligns with their sex assigned at birth. Thank you, thank you. Okay, and I'm just looking and checking the chat box here. Let's see, and I see that there were some questions around intersex. So yes, that umbrella term used for a wide range of natural bodily variations. So in some cases, the traits are visible at birth, and in others, they're not apparent until puberty. And so it could be due to chromosomal variations. And so again, that can be an umbrella term. So thank you for those questions in the chat box. All right, so wonderful. So thank you. So hopefully that helps to just review some familiarity with some of the LGBT affirming language. And now we really want to begin to think about, again, recognizing all that Austin has covered, thinking about the historical experiences that individuals in the LGBT community have experienced, particularly those older adults. Then we recognize, again, that there may be a real hesitancy to seek out any kind of institutional care, any kind of formal care. And so certainly we see that in long-term care. So again, we recognize LGBT individuals may go back into the closet. But I also want to recognize that this can occur with in-home care as well. So if someone's in a vulnerable situation, someone's relying on others to provide care and support, they may be reluctant or hesitant to share all of the aspects of their identity. Also recognizing, again, in community-based settings. So it could be at a senior center, it could be at a congregate nutrition program. It could be concerns of how they will be treated or accepted by staff, but also by other older adults or participants. So just recognizing that concern, that hesitancy is very real. So let's think about what are opportunities or best practices to help create more inclusive communities for everyone. So let's move on and look at some of those opportunities. All right, so these are best practices, again, across the continuum of care. So it could be in a long-term care setting, a community-based setting. It could be, again, efforts to just make sure that your organization is responsive and meeting the needs of all of the individuals who need your service. And so recommendation would be to conduct a self-audit. If you're an aging service provider, take the time to conduct a self-audit of your own organization. And so that means a review of policies and procedures. We're going to talk about all of these in more detail. Your marketing materials, symbols and images on site, also what's being portrayed or shown out in the community, looking at programming, and also taking in considerations for training. So let's take a closer look at inclusive policies and procedures. So there would be a recommendation first and foremost to check in and see, hey, do we have a non-discrimination policy at this organization? So if you don't have one, you want to develop one. But if you do have one, it's worth pulling it off the shelf and reviewing it really closely to make sure that it includes protections for sexual orientation and gender identity. Because depending upon when the non-discrimination policy was developed, it may not specifically include protections for sexual orientation and gender identity. So you want to check in, make sure that it does. If it does, great. If it doesn't, work to revise that policy. But we all know a policy is only so effective if it's not being used regularly. So what you want to be sure to do is to make sure that all staff and all volunteers are familiar with that non-discrimination policy. Depending on your organization, you can also make sure that residents or participants are familiar with this non-discrimination policy as well. So we would recommend that you have staff and volunteers actually sign that they've seen and agree to that non-discrimination policy on a regular basis. So certainly there's an opportunity to do that upon hire. It could be something done even on an annual basis. And then there's that opportunity to then take that non-discrimination policy and place it on your website, put it on your brochures, put it on outreach materials, because remember, Austin shared with us, knowing that older adults in the LGBT community, they may be reluctant or hesitant to seek out care, services, and supports. That information being out there is going to be a cue to let someone know that this organization is inclusive. This organization may have allies working there. This organization may have had training to help support LGBT individuals. And so that communication is really important. So again, I think making sure you may have the policy, but are you utilizing the policy? Is everyone aware that you have that policy? So that's an opportunity. So then again, recognizing that we know in some cases that there are, again, could be challenges between participants or residents in terms of discrimination, consider an anti-bullying or a code of conduct policy for residents or participants. So again, regardless of the care setting, it's not uncommon for long-term care communities or even transit providers to have non-smoking policies, right? So it's saying, here's the things that you can or can't do on the vehicles or in the building or at the senior center. Consider developing an anti-bullying policy in that code of conduct policy for participants. And when anyone's a new participant or they're a new resident, again, depending on the setting, they see that policy, they acknowledge that policy. So that's really important, and that can help to combat that participant to participant or resident to resident bullying that may occur. It also is communicating to anyone who might be a part of the LGBT community, ooh, this organization, they're taking steps to try to make this a more inclusive organization. And so that's really important. And so again, covering the items, having everyone acknowledge them when they're new and even on a regular basis. And then also just saying, again, I want to emphasize the importance of including volunteers in these conversations too. So your staff are so important, the older adults you serve, of course, but also volunteers. All right. And I know there's a lot of chatting happening in the chat box. I'll have to catch up. We do have time for questions at the end, so I'll be sure to circle around there. All right, so let's talk about representation. We know representation is so important. So again, this is part of that self-audit, taking a look through your own materials. And so that could be on site at your organization. It could also be the marketing materials that are being put out into the community at large. So looking at photographs, posters, brochures, website, any promotional materials, and seeing, how inclusive are the images that we're putting out there? Do we have an opportunity to make it more inclusive, more diverse? Again, looking on site at photographs, posters, what books do you have in the waiting room? What magazines do you have in the waiting room? Rainbow flags or safe zone signs. These are all signs that would, again, be a cue to an individual that this is an inclusive organization. You could think of even having those symbols in an intake, in the social worker's intake office, for example. People may have little pins that they wear on their name tag. The opportunities are really vast. There's so many ways to implement. And some of these, they're very small things that you can do to, again, send that message that this is an inclusive organization. And then when you consider programming, so this is also an opportunity. So thinking of a GSA club, so used to be referred to as the Gay Straight Alliance Club, so now more commonly called Genders and Sexualities Alliance Club, PFLAG, and Austin mentioned that. Organizations, having those meetings at your organization or participating in them, or having speakers come to share information with your team or your participants or residents. I'm thinking about things like Pride Month, right? So what could you do around Pride Month in terms of programming? Maybe it's a review of these milestones throughout the movement for LGBT Pride. Maybe it's getting a local organization to come and share information about resources. Maybe it's having a Pride celebration. There are so many things that you can do. It's just, again, being intentional and making sure to take that time to be inclusive. So just some ideas there. So this is just a few images, again, recognizing some of those symbols, again, that could be cues or signs to individuals that this is an inclusive organization. Note the one down in the bottom left-hand corner, that's the Pride and Care North Carolina logo that was created for the education efforts that occurred in the skilled nursing communities across North Carolina. And that's still an ongoing effort. But just an example, and again, using the rainbow flags or transgender flags, again, to send those signals and cues. So just a few examples there. We'll keep moving. I know, time is flying. So what about what we would call sexual orientation and gender identity questions? So in the spirit of person-centered care, right, the idea is we want to know about that person so we can best support them, knowing what's important to them, who are the important people to them. And so taking the time to include sexual orientation and gender identity questions on any kind of intake forms, it's very worthwhile, again, in the spirit of person-centered care. And so sometimes these questions are referred to as SOGI questions. And there's a few important factors. One, you want to make sure that if you're implementing SOGI questions, that your staff are trained on why you're asking these questions, that they're trained to be able to communicate to anyone who's being asked those questions, that everyone's being asked these questions, and of course that they can communicate that answering the questions is optional. Again, so to make sure staff are able to communicate, we're asking this just because we want to provide the best support possible. That really helps, again, provide some peace of mind for individuals when answering those questions. And again, you can think of it as we'd love to know who are the important people in your life, because who would we need to contact if there's an emergency, or who should be included in your care planning? You get the idea. So the next few slides, we have just a few examples of more inclusive questions. And so these are just examples, but you can see you would have the opportunity to ask for gender, so that gender identity, also what you could still collect that sex assigned at birth, because we know that there may be some health implications, of course, that need to be accommodated. So again, that's a question. We'll go into the next slide. Asking for sexual orientation. Again, note that there's always that option to decline. And we can go to the next one. Pronouns. So again, asking someone for what pronouns they would like you to use. So these are all opportunities. And when we get to the resources section, there are a number of resources available through SAGE, that national organization, that you can utilize to begin to see some of these best practices for implementing sexual orientation and gender identity questions into intake, if that's something that you don't currently have. All right. Let's see here. So best practices around training. So again, we appreciate you being here for this training today. And what we recognize is that training, it's not a one and done, right? So training, cultural competency training, to be effective, it really needs to be ongoing. And I know that even through our years of doing cultural competency training through the Pride and Care North Carolina project, I learned something new every time. So we have so much to learn. So a lot of this is kind of philosophically really being committed to say, we want to continue to learn. We want to continue to support the people we serve as best as we can. And so we're open to receiving that information. And we're going to, again, be committed to ongoing training. So training is important for all staff. So not just some staff, all staff, anyone who will interact with older adults or clients in any way. Of course, best practice training should occur at orientation. But again, there should be ongoing training. So whether that's annual training, quarterly training, whatever that may be. Again, a best practice would be to include LGBT individuals in the training if possible. And so again, if you have individuals who are part of the LGBT community who would be willing to come in and help with that training, that would be wonderful. If you have team members who are part of the LGBT community, awesome. And then really, we would recommend utilizing those SAGE resources. So again, it's a wealth of resources, treasure trove of information, the SAGE website and their team, they're wonderful. And we'll talk more, just give you a sampling of what they have to offer. And I'll just mention that then again, recognizing that that training opportunity is still important for volunteers as well. So training is important for all staff, all volunteers. All right, so this is just a snippet from a 2018 study, and it's just a snapshot to really show that some of these best practices that we're mentioning, they may seem like small changes, but they truly can have a large impact on the comfort level that an LGBT older adult may have in utilizing those services. So it says more than 8 of 10 respondents say they feel more comfortable with providers who are specifically trained in LGBTQ residents' needs. Use of advertising to highlight LGBTQ friendly services was noted as favorable by 86% of respondents of the survey. Having staff members who are part of the LGBTQ community was seen as preferable by 85% of respondents. Again, representation matters. And then displaying LGBTQ welcoming signs, whether it was in the community or online, was noted as favorable by more than 80% of the respondents. So again, these changes, these best practices can be really powerful in increasing the comfort level of accessing services and supports. All right. So this is just a note. This is specifically for long-term care communities. The SAGE organization, the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, have developed what they call the Long-Term Care Equality Index. So if any of you happen to be with a long-term care organization, or I know we saw there's some ombudsmen who are participating today, you could share this with the communities that you work with, and that this is an opportunity for long-term care communities to take a pledge to become more inclusive. When they sign up online for that LEI index, they actually then have their contact information and are connected to resources to help them with implementing best practices in the long-term care setting. So we just wanted to highlight that organization or opportunity. Additional resources here. Again, this is just a few of the resources that are available through SAGE. So you can see inclusive services for LGBT older adults, a practical guide to creating welcoming agencies. Love it, right? So if you're interested in what we've been talking about today, you want to find out more, you can visit the LGBTagingcenter.org. Again, all of this information through SAGE. If you happen to be with an area agency on aging or the state unit on aging, there's a tool there strengthening your state and local aging plan. If you're interested in learning more about sexual orientation and gender identity questions, then you can utilize this orange guide, Inclusive Questions for Older Adults, that practical guide to collecting data on sexual orientation and gender identity. And then the green guide here is all about LGBT programming for older adults. So again, this is just a sampling, but such great information. We found this information to be so helpful for us. I think you'll find it interesting as well. All right. So let's see. Thank you. And I'm just seeing some of the chat box. Thank you, Derek, in the chat box is talking about the SAGE trainings, and they are great. They're wonderful. And this is perfect timing because I do want to tell you about SAGE Care. So that is the LGBTQ plus aging cultural competency training and credentialing program available through SAGE, and it's a wonderful opportunity. We, again, at the Area Agency on Aging here at Centralina have gone through it for several years. I can't recommend it enough. Their team is fabulous. They have a variety of different topics that they can share information about. Again, all of those tips, all of those tools. So it's a great opportunity. So I encourage you to visit their website if you're interested in having some more training for your staff and your team. All right. And then some other cool resources available through SAGE. So Austin shared that we know LGBT older adults are more likely to experience loneliness and isolation. I saw someone put in the chat box about how detrimental that is to your health, loneliness and isolation. And so they have a variety of programs to help increase connection among the LGBT older adult population. And so one is the SAGE Connect program, which is a phone video call support program. So again, just taking note, this is something that you may want to take advantage of. You may want to pass it along to individuals who you're serving. And then lastly, also that SAGE has an LGBTQ plus elder hotline. So another resource to be aware of and to take advantage of. So I know we are flying and we want to save a little time for some questions. So let's get in one more polling question before we turn it over to questions and answers from the group. So our last question of the day for you is, what best practices has your workplace implemented already, or what best practices do you plan to implement? So is it regular staff cultural competency training? Is it sexual orientation and gender identity questions on intake forms? Visible LGBT plus signs and images on site or on printed materials? Or is it inclusive LGBT programming? And if you have other best practices, things that you've done at your organization, feel free to put that in the chat box as well. So again, we'll give you a moment for that. Put in your thoughts here, and then we will check in and see how many questions we can get to. Let's see. Okay, wonderful. So it looks like many are interested or already doing regular staff cultural competency training. And then there's some interest or already some folks out there who are doing sexual orientation, gender identity questions for intake, or have those visible LGBT signs and images on site, or are including LGBT programming. So wonderful. So again, those are just a few best practices, some things to consider. We do encourage you to utilize the resources that were provided as well for more information. And at this time, we will try to get to a few questions. So Caitlin, I know there's been a flurry of activity in the chat box. Where should we start?
Let's see, I'm going to look through because I think some of the questions may have been answered as the presentation has gone on. So if anybody has anything else, please throw it in. And I'll look back as well.
Wonderful. And I know that the question came through earlier. Someone had asked in the chat box about the PowerPoint, and Caitlin shared we will be posting that. So again, all those links that you've seen throughout, you'll be able to refer back to and go to those sites to get more information.
Not seeing any new questions, Katie.
Well, wow. Well, then that means we did it. We're on time then. Oh, and will the video be available? And hi, Dawn. Yes, the video, it's being recorded. It will be posted to the website. So if you have any staff or team members who weren't able to view today that you think would be interested, please feel free to share it. But that information will be posted to the website. And I guess I'll just say thank you so much. Again, we know time, it's our most precious resource for everyone. So we appreciate you all taking the time to be with us this morning. Thanks for all of your participation and all of your questions. Y'all have been wonderful. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
I'm going to throw this in there too, guys. I just put in the link for upcoming webinars as well.
There was a couple Q&A questions I don't think we got to about AAA's board of directors are very politically leaning elected officials, and he works in a very rural area, and concerned that prioritizing LGBT inclusivity would not be well received. That would have been interesting to.
I just put our contact information in too, so if anyone is still in queue and didn't have a chance to get your questions answered, if you reach out to us, we'd be happy to talk to you offline also.